Oh, yeah. Welcome, everyone, to the Daily Hi-Fi Podcast. We do this every Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. My name is Chana.
Yeah,
I am the Techno Dad.
Welcome,
and we've got our special guest. You got to turn that down, Joey.
Every Monday, 4 p.m.
A special guest today, Paul Barton from PSB and Dave Morrison from IsoAcoustics, along with the Daily Hi-Fi crew. What's up, gentlemen? How you guys doing?
Good. What's going on, man?
What's up?
Good. All right.
Got some feedback there. I think I was trying to watch a video. I don't know if you guys are hearing that. But we're set now. We're good.
We should be all good.
Still trying to figure it out after how many episodes now?
I can't even count. There's been too many. Too many. But it's all good. All good. Yeah. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing just fine.
Very good.
Here in my home now for almost a month.
Wow.
So, you got started late. We've been here 6 months staying in.
Yeah.
This
guy.
Yeah. I guess, Dave, you've been at home for the whole time, right?
Yeah, I got back from Europe on March 12th and went into hibernation and haven't come out since.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we started on the 11th here, but yeah. I mean, we live in a ski resort town, and on top of everything, all that's nonsense is going on. It's been snowing like a lot, so we're just inside anyway. You know, on the sunny days we'd go to the ski resort, but that's closed. So. So it's kind of normal. My wife is she's still having problems with it. I'm not. I'm like, yeah, we could stay home. Cool. Already there.
Yeah. Hey Ron, you got some audiophile celebrities in here. Are you excited?
I'm just beside myself. I'm just so thrilled, and it's an honor to be able to chat with you guys, and this is going to be a fun show.
Oh, absolutely. I'm hoping it will.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fantastic.
When I told Ron, he was like, "Are you serious? The Paul Barton?
The Paul Barton?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm alive and well.
That's great.
And Dave, you're looking good over there too. Don't worry. I see you.
Thank you.
Got the piano back there. Got the cool lamp.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool lamp. That's important.
See a guitar back there too. You play a lot?
There's a few of them around here. I
Yeah.
don't play a lot, but I play at it.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Oh man. So yeah, we got a lot of good questions. We have the chat, people in the chat over here. So there's 6 of us. So you know, we're gonna stay busy this whole time.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. No, definitely. And Paul and Dave, if you just click on comments, you'll see the chats in your little, what is it? The
hello,
live comments. So if you want to respond to any of those,
yeah, you can post it in the little bottom box there. And if there's one you want me to put on the screen, just let me know. Like there's a timestamp by it, like you see Derek's up there. So just let me know.
Yeah, the time.
If you want to see.
So how long you guys known each other?
We first met back in I don't know, Dave. When was that? Like,
it was the mid 80s.
Mid 80s,
right?
Yeah,
longer than you thought.
Yeah,
indeed.
All right. And how'd you guys meet?
Well, Dave worked for the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in Canada here. It's similar to the BBC in England. And Dave, well, you can tell the story, Dave. You worked with the CBC, and I did some work with the CBC, in particular when they were choosing studio monitors across the country in all of their studios to standardize their studio monitoring across the country, similar to what the BBC did many years before that. And these tests were all conducted at the National Research Council, doing double-blind screen listening tests and correlating that with measurements. And it was part of a large study of subjective versus objective loudspeakers. And Dave was keen, and I think you were building one of the studios at the time, right, at the CBC, Dave?
Yeah, at the time, the CBC had 23 locations in Toronto. And so between the studios, radio and television, and data centers, and shops for building sets and so on, they were all over the city. And in the back of the what used to be the women's college on Jarvis Street was a chapel, and we were building or renovating a radio drama studio. And so the NRC had done this evaluation. They came up with a PSB speaker that the CBC was going to adapt, and I heard it in the studio, and wanted to get a pair for myself. So I had the opportunity to meet Paul, and I told him I was excited. I bought these speakers. I was bringing all this equipment home to test them and set them up. And he said, "I'll come around to your home and I'll set them up with you."
Nice.
And that was so it turned out to be a 101 on speaker design that evening. But we were listening to it and watching the printouts on the screen. We were using pink noise and playing with them. And Paul made a comment. He said, "The largest variable is out of my control." And I thought, well, bloody hell, I spent a lot of money on these speakers. I hope it's not. I hope we don't have to roll dice or something to get them to work. But he said, no, it's what people do with them, how they set them up. And so that night, as we moved them around in that infinitesimal way, and I could hear the difference and I could see the graphs, it was a little bit like a sailor learning how to read the wind off of other boats and off the shoreline, and I was hooked. And that's what really started this journey with speaker stands and isolation and IsoAcoustics after that.
Wow, that's amazing.
And Dave would keep, conversing with me over time, saying how he wanted to develop this product that this was long before ISO even started. He was passionate about building stands that could better improve the performance of loudspeakers. And Dave saw some of the lead that I took when I used the National Research Council in Ottawa to do product development. He saw that as an opportunity to further investigate his product development using some of the techniques and some of the hardware and software that's available and the human resources that were available at the National Research Council. Not only is there a facility for doing testing, but there's also a huge body of PhDs that specialize in psychoacoustics, sound propagation, sound absorption, controlling noise, doing hearing aid testing. They used to test all the hearing for the Canadian military at the National Research Council. And that was headed up by the head of the acoustics division. His name is Dr. Edgar Shaw. And Dr. Edgar Shaw was the head of the section, acoustic section at the National Research Council that Floyd Toole worked with. And
that's a familiar name.
Yeah, that's where I met Floyd Toole. I met Floyd Toole in 1974. And in 1974, PSB was the first company to use that facility to do product development. In fact, they hadn't even set up an infrastructure in order for me to pay for the facility. So we had to sort of do it under the table for a while, and I wasn't even allowed to tell people I was using the facility. Not until the government realized that applied research might be a good reason to justify all the work and the cost of the National Research Council. So now they want to promote the fact that people like PSB, companies like PSB, use the facility to do product development. And that continues to today. I can maybe show you some photographs of the National Research Council that Dave and I use. Just give me a moment here.
Donna, maybe you can pull up that question about why does Canada punch above its weight in the audio world? And I always wondered, like, how come so many companies are coming out of Canada? I'd get all these speakers like, there's a lot from Canada. What's going on over there?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that NRC opened their doors to doing this kind of research and product development. And that is, in this case, was to correlate objective measurements, which is measuring the speakers in a controlled environment like an anechoic chamber, and doing listening tests where people don't, it's sort of like in the medical industry, when they're trying to test a new drug, they will give the doctors 2 vials. One's labeled A and one's labeled B. And the doctors must give the drugs to 2 different patients. But the doctors don't know what drug A is and what drug B is. They can only observe what drug A is doing to the patient or what drug B is doing to the patient. Only the drug company knows what A and B is. That's called a double-blind screen test. And we do the same test with loudspeakers in rooms, where we put the speaker behind the screen. An operator sets up where the speakers are and how they're all connected to be switched between, say, A, B, and C. And then another person actually operates the system that does the switching, so that the person who's operating the switching, and the listeners are also allowed to do switching at some point during the experiment. They document or write down.
Ooh,
Everybody's alerts are going on.
alerts.
Come on.
So
Yeah, so we basically do a double-blind screen test on loudspeakers, and this particular body of work that was happening at the time between 1974 and roughly 1985, when I first met Dave, was all of this listening that was being done, and no other Canadian company was participating in this until 1982. And in 1982, Paradigm started using the facility. API, which had brands called Energy and Mirage, started using the facility. And another company in Northern Ontario, near Huntsville, called Axiom, Ian Calhoun, started using the facility to develop loudspeakers. So, and then another company called Rega Camber out of Montreal started using NRC to develop loudspeakers. And then a small handful of professional companies. One in particular was a company out of Ottawa called SOTA, State of the Art Electronics. That was operated by an engineer called Claude Fortier. And he actually was the designer of all the high-powered studio monitors that the CBC used in their high-powered studios.
very interesting.
Let me just get up some photographs.
Let's take a look. I saw a few pictures here. I'm not sure. What are we looking at here?
Okay, I'm going to have to share. Let me find this again.
Maybe I can get that service where you come to the house too after this is all over.
Exactly.
I have some speakers over here that are yours, so maybe we can do that thing too.
Opened up a can of worms, right?
I know it.
Paul's new service business.
Hey, Dave, what have you noticed as far as like the change in the industry from back then to now? Like, what are some of the changes you've seen?
Wow. Well, originally I was on the broadcasting side, right? So I was in, and when we started with IsoAcoustics, we started on the studio side of things. So it's only in the last number of years that we've moved into the hi-fi too. But I don't know. I find a lot more people are listening to wallpaper now than really appreciating the high fidelity. Don't you find that to be the case?
Yeah, I know what you mean. What do you mean by listening to wallpaper specifically? So I don't assume.
Not really looking for the high resolution.
Like elevator music.
Yeah, background.
Wallpaper music, elevator music, same thing.
Gotcha.
So they're not really tuned into the music. They're just it's just on.
They don't seem to have the same hi-fi passion that we had back then, I think, or at least as widespread.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at here on the screen?
Well, this is there are 2 basic chambers that are utilized to do research. This is a very large chamber. These wedges that you see here are 6 feet deep. And so they're 3 foot. You can see the people standing in the center of the
in the
image.
back, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you can see how small they are, and each one of those squares is 3 feet. So you can see that the width of the chamber is quite wide. And this chamber is pretty much flat down to 20 hertz. So we use this chamber to calibrate to another chamber. Let me just switch over to the chamber. This chamber is I don't have oh, Dave, you have some good pictures of it, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
I think I can show those as well.
Yeah, so I noticed in the other one, how does the floor look like a flat floor? I've seen others where it looked like almost like you're standing on a net, and then it looks like they have more absorption on the bottom too.
Yeah, the day I took this picture, they had the 2-pi floor in. That floor comes out, and there's aircraft wire screen below it that you walk on, and so there are wedges below that, the same as the wedges on the wall.
Wow, yeah, that's what I figured.
So the day I went to take these pictures, it was being used for another application where they need what they call a 2-pi. In other words, it's not spherically anechoic. It's only half a sphere anechoic, and one wall is reflective. So if you wanted to simulate an in-wall loudspeaker, you would put it in the floor.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Paul, do you still have access to anechoic chambers when it comes to your designs and working on speakers? Do you still have access to a lot of these?
I frequent this chamber. This is the control room. This picture was taken quite some time ago. You can see we're using a CRT monitor. And there's also the monitor up on the top shelf that you can see is actually a video camera in the chamber, so I can see what I'm measuring. And there's a laser beam on the microphone that allows me to see where the microphone is positioned on the baffle of the loudspeaker.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you see here in the center, there's a microphone preamp just below the speaker. And there's a box above it with all these black dots across it. Those represent a microphone. And there are 5 microphones in the chamber. And I can scan all 5 microphones and look in real time at the listening window of a loudspeaker.
Wow.
And it's a very powerful tool when you're doing tuning, because when you look at the speaker on axis, one measurement, you're going to see artifacts that aren't happening in other positions around the speaker due to a phenomenon we call diffraction, which is when the sound emanates from the driver and the energy moves across the baffle at the speed of sound in air. When it reaches the edge of the baffle, there's a dramatic change in impedance, and that creates another source of sound, which eventually radiates from the speaker and causes constructive and destructive interference, because with 2 sources, you get interference based on the distance you are and the distance that they are apart. So I want to get rid of that, because what I want to see in a loudspeaker measurement is I want to see the resonances which occur everywhere around the loudspeaker, whereas diffraction only occurs when the direct sound and the diffraction off the edge happen to coincide where you're sitting, causing either constructive or destructive interference. And I want to get rid of that, because in a real world, that particular phenomena is one that you don't actually hear, because it gets masked by all the other reflections that are around you.
Gotcha.
Wow. And that can be calculated, right?
Oh yeah, you can. A lot of these box simulation programs do have software utilities that allow you to predict where these are going to happen in 3-dimensional space.
Is that why a lot of the speakers have, curves on the baffle and stuff like that?
Absolutely. The severity of the diffraction of an edge is directly proportional to the rate of change of the edge. So if it's a right angle, that's the most dramatic.
Sure.
If it's softer, then the rate of change is gradual, so the effect is less severe.
So those KEF guys know what they're doing with those LS50s, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Wow, where did that come from, man?
No, because it's curved.
Yeah.
So do you want
all curves? Yeah.
now? Are you sharing my screen right now?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. Were you looking at the picture before just now?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
saw that.
Okay. So I'm just going to go to this one. Remember, I said they were doing double blind screen listening tests.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
There
Well,
it is.
this is the room, and you can see there's a little indicator behind the screen at the top, which is currently speaker 1 is turned on.
Okay.
And there are 4 of those. And then in the middle, between the 2 chairs, you'll see a box, which allows the listener to switch.
Gotcha.
And the microphone there is to set equal volume for each loudspeaker, because sensitivity is not a timbral indicator, because we want everything to be equal, including the volume of the loudspeaker,
Sure.
except the only thing we change is the actual speaker, so that the only and that's good science. Good science experiment only has one variable.
Isolate it down to 1. Yep.
Teacher, I have a question.
So that's the listening room. In fact, this room eventually became the recommended IEC listening room for doing speaker evaluation.
Wow.
You'll
So
notice. Go ahead.
You're mentioning differences in volume. How many decibels would be the difference between somebody preferring one over the other? Like, how accurate would that need to be?
Within a quarter dB.
Quarter dB.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's pretty precise.
Yeah. So
That's
we
crazy.
use this microphone here to set up the equal levels for all of the speakers.
Nice.
And you'll notice that the room has treatment on it. You don't see it behind the screen,
Sure.
but there's a drape behind the screen, and behind that screen, where there used to be windows, there's actually membrane diaphragms that are tuned to get rid of standing waves in the room. And there are also absorbers on the left wall, you'll see up in the top, and there are absorbers on the right wall near the top. And this picture actually was taken during the process, and there were actually more absorbers. There were some traps in different places. Now, that's not to say that you need to do this to your room. What we wanted to do was be able to make the experiment more efficient, because if we really want to make only one variable, then only one speaker, or 2 speakers for that matter, and one listener in one position would merit a good experiment that didn't have any outside variables. What we tried to do here, this was Floyd Toole's work, what Floyd tried to do here was to make all 3 positions have roughly the same low frequency transfer function, so that you could do 3 listeners at the same time in the room and get more efficient results.
Gotcha.
And the room was treated to accommodate the fact that we wanted 3 listeners to be able to hear the same thing. But we also invited listeners to change seats during the listening experience in case there were some small differences that they noted and could take out of the equation if they heard differences when they moved into different locations. As you can see, it's not an easy control test to do.
Yeah, sure.
And it takes a long time to establish good data out of these tests.
Well, I don't want to get overly technical, but I have a quick question about the microphone. And it's just not every day I get to talk to somebody who's done these tests. So I'm curious, when you're saying they're calibrated to a certain decibel level, is that for a specific frequency, or is it averaged over, the full range of the speakers? Or is it, what range of frequencies is it?
We use C-weighted pink noise to set the levels.
Okay.
Which is the highs are rolled off and the lows are rolled off, so that we as human beings, if you were to ask a group of people to listen to something, and if you boost the bass, they will say it has more bass. If you boost the treble, they will say it has more treble. If you boost the mid range, they'll often say it's louder. So so what we do is try and focus on the area where the perceived loudness is. It's very hard sometimes to make two speakers sound the same volume because of their frequency response differences can be so much different. It's hard to say which one is louder or which one sounds colored. And sometimes that's a challenge when doing these tests.
Thank you for answering that one.
So I got a question for you, Paul. Looking at the 3 seats, so let's say you bring 3 listeners in, they listen to a selection, and then they're free to choose between speaker 1, 2. You said there's 4, right?
Usually 4. It could be less, but 4, no more than 4.
So during that test, do the participants, do they kind of communicate, or are they just kind of writing down their thoughts? What does that process look like for you?
Well, we urge the listeners to refrain from comments or body language.
Sure, that's awesome.
Because that can influence the individual's judgments.
Good.
So, it's one of the prerequisites for getting in the test is that you cannot show body language. I can tell you some stories. We used to bring some audiophile, and I won't mention any names, audiophile magazine reviewers into this environment, and I brought just about everyone that I could throughout the years. Many of which are currently still active in our industry, that have experienced this environment, and I can tell you that some people. One of the things that we found with these tests is listeners that aren't accustomed in particular to this room or accustomed to doing this kind of test find themselves in an awkward position because now not only are they judging speakers, but with the experience that we have, we are judging them as listeners. And so some reviewers wouldn't come to that realization until they actually walked into the room and realized, holy crap.
Yeah, it's like, this is real. This is happening.
They're going to be testing me.
That's funny.
As well.
And I've heard that too. I've heard when people say, oh, well, I can't do these tests because I get nervous. And so it's not accurate because I'm nervous.
Yeah, well, that could be true. Yeah, that could be true. But, just relax and have a listen. And I can tell you, well, what we found was if we started in the morning, each round of listening would be about 20 minutes. So we do 2 rounds in the morning and then 2 rounds in the afternoon with a 20-minute break in each side between each listening session. And we'd have maybe 3 people come in, do the listening, and we'd put some good speakers behind the screen, and we were trying to get them to determine. And often I would put some of our products behind there and some of the products we know well behind the screen and do comparisons. And we would always take the first round of testing and throw it out because listeners would come out of the first session if, say, there were 4 good loudspeakers behind the screen, and they would be saying, I can't tell a difference between any of these.
Wow.
And I would say, okay, well, just go back in the room. We're going to juggle some things around. We'll change what one is to another number, and you won't know which speaker is which compared with the old test. And we'll start a new test.
Gotcha.
After they've had the first session and they go in the second session, what they end up doing is they're able to subtract the influence of the room, which they were just adjusting to.
Sure.
And after the second round, they come out of the round saying, you changed all those speakers because they sound dramatically different. So there is a period when doing these tests that you must adapt to the environment. Gotcha. because the room and the effect the room has initially can swamp what you're actually hearing in terms of accuracy. And that's part of the brain and the way we process.
Is this the room, Paul, that has that mechanically moves the speakers so that they're all in the same spot?
No, this was that was done after Floyd went to Harman, and he created the shuffling, which is the auto. What we have is it's a turntable that's big enough to set 4 speakers on it.
Nice.
And you can turn the turntable.
Cool.
I want to live in that room.
So, Paul, when they're doing that, are like, do you give them something to, like, is there a series of questions that you're asking them on a piece of paper, or?
Yeah, we give them score sheets.
Okay, gotcha.
And at the beginning of the score sheet, we give them some help in describing what the task at hand is, and that we were trying to not say necessarily what they preferred.
Right.
Although the assumption I make when designing a loudspeaker is that they prefer that the speaker be a clear glass through which you see the original performance,
right,
where there are no colorations, nothing added, nothing taken away. And so we tell the listeners, this is a test to determine how natural what you're hearing sounds.
Sure.
And so the listeners are given a description, and we also help them out for early listeners or listeners that don't have a large experience with listening tests. We give them a whole bunch of adjectives to help them to correlate and describe with common adjectives like boomy or tizzy or bright or dull or forward or backward or distant or open or closed. So we kind of give them all those adjectives in a list that they can refer to when they're trying to express what it is they're hearing. And then they have...
So musical is not on there? Or chocolatey?
Well,
that's speaker cables.
Yeah. Well, what we do is we have like these scale sliders on the sheet. One might say closeness and farness, so you can put a mark where it's either far or close. We can say bassy or too much mid-range or clarity or muddiness. And they have sliders that they can score them on a scale of 0 to 10. And then at the end, they have two major questions which we use to accumulate the data. One is pleasantness and one is accuracy, because they can be two different things. And we usually use accuracy as the score that we give that person gave to that speaker. But the reason we give all those other sliders is so that the guy can look back after he's compared speakers and he can compare, oh, that one was brighter than that one and this one was, so he has some kind of an organized way of listening that he can now come to a conclusion. And we ask the listener in a series of 4 tests, which is their preference, which is their second preference, their third preference, and their fourth preference.
That's amazing. I love how controlled it is. They can't even do, can't be like, hey, what do you think about these? These sound pretty good, right?
No, you're not allowed.
No. No head nodding. That's amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Are you still sharing my screen?
I took it off for a second. Let's go back to it. There we go.
Okay, this is the outside of the M37.
Big box.
That's where the
like my storage space, but okay.
And you see how tall that room is.
Yeah, it's a big place, and those big doors beside the van. This place in the wintertime, just imagine like 4 feet of snow everywhere.
Sure.
So I would drive into this opening so I could do all my unloading and loading inside the building.
Without freezing your butt off, huh?
Yeah, it was kind of cool. This next picture is, in fact, an aerial view of the whole of the NRC that is centered in Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada. And you can see at the top of the image, there is like a waterway. That's the Ottawa River, which separates Ontario from Quebec. And this is a campus with about 65 buildings. And included in those buildings is aerospace, building research, agricultural. They have in the middle of this image, it's hard to tell, there's a very long building, which they actually have a duplicate of the St. Lawrence Seaway inside there to model how the water is controlled and flowed. And so this is the campus and the facility that I've been going to, and Dave has been going to for since 1974. So 46 years.
I have 2 questions that about some of your latest products that I have in. for review, and then afterwards I want to move on and talk about IsoAcoustic stuff. But first, I want to ask you. You're talking about the room, and you're showing us all these photos, and these have something called room feel, right? Is that related? What is room feel when it comes to these M4U8s that I'm wearing here?
Okay.
And also, so that's part one, and then part two. So you can just go on. Is I have the Alpha, the P5s, and I was just kind of curious, like, what was the question here? Original Alpha speakers put PSB speakers on the map. So what is so special about this series and the current P5s? And I want to add to that, like, how does that relate? Because you said that this is Canada's version of the BBC, and of course, BBC is known for like LS35As as their monitors. So kind of relate all those things. So those are my three questions.
Those are pretty loaded questions.
I know.
Well, no.
It's all right. You can handle it.
Yeah. Let me
In
just
20 words or less.
Okay, well, room feel is, you saw that listening room I had up there. In conjunction with that listening room, beside that room in the facility was another listening room, but that listening room was built for a project that PSB, Paradigm, API, which is Energy Mirage, and SOTA, the high-powered studio monitor manufacturer that I mentioned earlier, we formed a company called CARC, the Canadian Audio Research Consortium. And in 1987, we started a project which was called Athena. And the pursuit of Athena was to develop the criteria and the equalization for doing room correction. And we were trying to develop a loudspeaker. Keep in mind, this was back in 1987 with DSP to do room correction. And we over the 3.5 years we did this project, we invested between the three companies in Canada. We put about $1 million into it to come up with what we thought was the target curve for doing EQ of a speaker in a room. If you think about this for a moment, if you put a typical loudspeaker in a typically good room and compare the frequency response of that speaker averaged in the listening position to the frequency response in an anechoic chamber, you'll find that there is a distinct difference in how the direct radiating loudspeaker performs in a room with reflections than it does with a room that has no reflections, like an anechoic chamber. And speakers in general are designed to be flat on axis in an anechoic chamber, but typically speakers that we listen to, we call direct radiators, which means they have drivers on one baffle. They're not an omnidirectional loudspeaker. So at low frequencies, a direct radiating loudspeaker radiates in 360 degrees quite efficiently. But as the frequencies get higher, the directivity gets narrower and narrower. So if you took the total energy that speaker puts out in a sphere, which is essentially what you hear when it's in a room because you get all these reflections, it's not flat. If this is the low frequency, let's see which way you're doing it. If this is if this is the low frequency,
Right.
the room actually causes increases in gain. And at high frequencies, because you're getting all these reflections at lows and mid frequencies, and the directivity is really good at low frequencies, you get more of that energy that you hear. You actually hear a bit of the direct sound in combination with the sound power that the speaker has, the total energy it puts out. And so if you're putting a speaker and EQing it in a room, you want to make sure that you've taken into account what the room has done. So a flat loudspeaker playing back in a room, a good room, will have a boost at the low end and a cut at the high frequency because of the directivity and the omnidirectional at low frequencies. What is that correction? It's called room feel.
So that's like a house curve almost.
It's a house curve that was determined through research And we did this with double blind screen listening tests with students that we paid to come in after school and do listening tests and tell us which ones they liked the best. And we created different target curves to see whether they thought that sounded most natural to them. Based and then that criteria I used because if you think about it, we're listening to music that was designed or mixed to be played back on speakers in a room.
Mm-hmm, correct.
Headphones do not have a room. So I put the room curve into the headphones.
Amazing.
And that's what's called room feel.
Room feel.
On the next version, can you make it sound like as if the speakers were far away from me too?
Well, yeah. Well, there is some research being done on getting the sound outside your head, and many companies like Smythe in England have been doing it. But the hardware and software is a pretty heavy lift. But given the DSP power of these chips that we're now using in headphones, it won't be long before we will be able to make headphones behave so that the sound listening to music that was recorded to be played back on speakers in a room can sound like the sound is outside your head, like it is in a room when you're wearing headphones. So it has the sound outside the head. One thing that you need to do in order for that phenomena to work, guys, is you also have to have a head tracker. If you don't have a head tracker, trying to get the sound outside your head will be almost impossible, because the brain needs that tracking in order for it to think that it's in 3 dimensions.
Interesting.
Amazing. So it's no problem if you have a binaural recording.
Now, if you have a binaural recording, that all bets are off, but you still must keep your head steady. Otherwise, the illusion will collapse. Your brain will say, well, wait a minute, you moved your head, but the sound didn't change. What's going on here? And it will give you false cues based on that.
Amazing. I like these. I need to still review these, but yeah. And then about these speakers. About these speakers, I don't know, Chana, can you show them? So you don't want to hear something kind of funny, totally not sound related. Well, I guess kind of sound related. And I do have a question about them. So I have the PSB Alpha P5s here, and one of the things I was most impressed with is this grill. I love this grill.
Oh, the magnetic grill?
It's like so thin.
Well, the key there was to create a very fine perf, so that the open area was about 40%, and have it as close to the tweeter as I can make it, because if the reflection occurs at a frequency whose wavelength is proportional to the distance it is from the source, then the reflection will not occur in the audible range, because the first quarter frequency, let's say at 20 kilohertz, is 1/8 of an inch. So as long as the grill is closer or as close to it as 1/8 of an inch, nothing below that will reflect off of it.
Paul, are you telling me that it's okay if I keep these grills on when I'm listening?
It doesn't measure any different with and without.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's always one of my objectives. Some people want to listen to it, and I'd hate to think that, most people would listen to it with the grill on. Most dealers would demonstrate it with the grill off.
Right.
So would I want the consumer to be auditioning what he's going to take home and listen to with the grill off? Best thing to do is make it so the grill is the same with and without.
I figured. I was about to do some measurements to see what kind of difference, but that's amazing because I have kids, so I have to keep the grill on, and a lot of times, I can only take them off at night when they're sleeping or something like that. But yeah, that's awesome. So, the other question was how the Alpha line put you guys on the map.
Well, Alpha, it was a kind of an interesting story. I was asked to develop a loudspeaker that had no bells and whistles, just performance, and at a very affordable price. So the way we constructed it, the components I used, the way I installed the components, the fact that the grill was not removable, it was just wrapped around the baffle, no extra cost. That was the beginning of the Alpha. And I was at a show in Las Vegas that year, 1991, when we were demonstrating the Alpha, and I was using a song by Bella Fleck called the flight the flight
hippo?
of the
The
flight of the
The
cos
hippo?
the
Yeah.
flight of the cosmic hippo, which has got a lot of bass on it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
And so we had our own booth in the ballroom at the Mirage Hotel at CES in January of '91, and we were demonstrating the Alpha. And I went out into the hallway just to take a breather. I was doing a lot of demos, and I saw it on his badge. I bumped into what's his name? Jack English, who used to write for Stereophile magazine. He was a freelance writer, and he had his badge on Stereophile. So we just got talking, and he said, he asked me, he said, well, what are you showing this year? I says, well, I'm showing a new entry-level product for people who are, don't want to spend a lot of money but want some performance. So he wandered down and did a demo, and that year he deemed it the best sound product at the show, and all kinds of accolades. And then John Atkinson did a review of it, and it just took right off. So
Nice.
yeah, that's the history of the Alpha. And I did an update of it in '99, around '99, about 10 years later, and then another update 20 years later now. So the Alpha has had really three different generations. The one that's behind you, Joe, is the latest, called the P5. We also have a smaller version called the P3, and there's also a center channel available. And we also have two different subs that are in the series. One's called the S8 and the other's called the S10.
That's amazing. So I have mine on these just some pretty basic stands, nothing special, with some spikes on there. Dave, what do you think about that? Is that okay with you?
How dare you?
Am
Joe.
I doing okay over here? Or
Spikes.
am I a bad human being?
You're not a bad human being.
All
but,
right.
But to me, that's like putting it on broken glass.
Ooh.
Wow.
It's no, I mean, this is our whole world really breaks down into three things. And I think the first one everybody gets. When you put a speaker on a surface, you can excite that surface.
Sure.
So I don't know whether your table there is like an IKEA table or whether it's 19 inches of granite, but there's a question of whether you're exciting that surface or not exciting it, and it'll contribute with dissonant sound and some level of distortion. The second thing that people get is that the structure-borne noise, that the energy will go into that supporting surface and will be conducted on to somewhere else, causing anomalies somewhere, or even communication between the speakers, causing changes, distortion, and so on. But the third one is the one that people generally don't appreciate, and that is when you put a speaker down on the surface, there's an internal reflection that comes back up inside. And you can think of that like bolting a pipe to the wall and hitting it with a hammer. The vibration will go down and hit the wall, and it will come back up into the speaker, and it'll introduce smear, it'll introduce cloudiness. But when you have two channels, any artifacts that are similar in both channels, we perceive them to be in the middle. So it causes the soundstage to become two-dimensional. So the heart of all of our products is to create that openness and clarity by that high degree of isolation and managing those three elements. Now, in times past, isolation often got a bad rap because you might have vertical isolation, vertical disconnection from the supporting surface, but laterally you weren't maintaining the speaker. And so there were losses as the driver goes forward, the cabinet goes back. The net result is something less than the driver going forward. So our system has a suction cup-like effect on the bottom to hold it to the surface. We have lateral stiffness inside. There's three elements. There's no one single path that connects from the speaker to the supporting surface. So we have that high degree of isolation, and we we don't colorize it at all. We're very accurate in that way.
I'm laughing here because Chana and Ron are both showing
They're
two different
competing.
products here. Showing what are these?
Which one's
What do you
better?
got there, Chana? What do you got there, Ron?
The Vanna White.
Yeah. All right. So the big question: which one looks better? Which one presents better?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, the one that Ron's holding, the Aureas, they've got a suction cup. They've got an isolator on the top and on the bottom. And the isolator on the top connects to the speaker, and the isolator on the bottom connects to the supporting surface. The Gaia that Chana's holding, the top isolator is bolted to the housing, and the housing's bolted to the speaker. So there's even a greater connectivity to the speaker. So the Gaia will perform better than the Aurea in like-to-like comparisons.
So they connect like with like a screw, or how do they connect to the speaker?
Pardon me?
Like you said, they actually attach to.
Yeah, they attach. There's a
they give you a whole bunch.
Nice. Check that out.
Screws too.
Yeah.
Check it out.
We have about
Super
we
cool.
have about 2 dozen variations of thread for whatever's required.
Gotcha.
One nice.
The other one's just a puck. It just goes underneath and connects to the bottom. Very easy to install.
I didn't mean to interrupt there. I apologize. Yeah, I was going to mention that's one of the things that I like about this is that you can use these for a wide variety of components. It doesn't have to be speakers. You can use them for turntables and amplifiers, you name it. Anything that makes noise, you can isolate it with these, which is pretty handy.
Does that work with kids and spouses?
Not at all. No. So Dave, you've got your work cut out for you, buddy.
That's your next project.
Kids and spouses, okay?
Just make a big one. They can just put them on there.
So does this quick question? Does a suction cup does that work on most speakers? Because I know some of them have a little bit of a texture to it. Would that ruin the effect if it has a texture on the outside?
When we say suction cup, it doesn't have to adhere. You don't have to lift the thing and hold it hard against it.
All right.
But because it's got because of that surface, it connects very well to the speaker, and it'll, the top isolator will be one with the speaker, just as the lower isolators on the supporting surface.
Wow.
And again, because there's 3 layers there, there's no one single path for energy to pass from one to the supporting surface. So it has a high degree of isolation, and it stabilizes it, so it's very effective. And you always rotate it with the logo forward or 180 degrees back, because their bias inside, it's to get rid of that natural oscillation that's where an object will begin to rotate around. It remains on axis. And then by managing shape, thickness, and geometry, we control how much it, we control its reactance for a given weight range.
So I'm very averse to stuff that is not backed in some sort of scientific evidence, and that's why I'm not afraid to ask you these questions, because I saw your documentation, and you did do a lot of testing in those facilities that we're talking about. But a question I have, and I'm sure you can answer it, is what would be the difference? Let's say, I see some foam blocks that I can buy on Amazon for like $16, and that's gonna supposed to decouple my speakers, let's say from a desk or something like that. What would be the difference between what you have and those?
Well, first of all, any homogeneous material can only work in a relatively narrow range. That if it worked for the weight that you had, it would only work in a narrow range. Secondly, there's no lateral stiffness, if you like, to manage that energy and the direction of the motive force in the speaker itself. And we build our products for a weight range so that they're built. There's different models for different weights, and you just switch from you just pick the appropriate one for it. So I think you'll find that there's a very significant difference when you A/B them back and forth. You'll hear the difference straight away.
I don't know if do you happen to have that picture up from your document that shows you doing the tests, and with the lasers on the speaker, you had some speakers there and you were using some lasers to see what was happening with them. And from what I saw, the frequency kind of looked similar, but then there was another test that you did where it showed that it made a different type of difference that wasn't necessarily frequency response. From my understanding, I thought you were doing some testing with like some bungee cords. I don't know. I might be able to pull it up too.
Oh, if you wouldn't mind doing that. My screen just went nutty here.
I'm just sharing a screen of Dave's ISO feet on one of the PSB models called the T3. And this is something that David made an adapter for in order for it to work with the PSB T3 tower.
Yep. So the PSB's got a M10 stud, I think, and we've got an adapter that goes between their studs. So you use their knob and thread, and you just adapt our piece on the bottom.
Let's see if I can share this here. Share.
Is it coming in?
Let me try to find this
While
particular
he's
window.
trying to do that, we've got a question in the comments that says from JP RTP says, can you ask Paul when he will be updating the T3? Is there any plans for that?
Well, as you can imagine, sorry for the play on words, imagine T3. I'm always, we're always one step ahead of what you see out there. So anytime there's a product on the market, you can bet that there's one in development that will eventually be replacing it.
Cool.
So I can honestly say I'm heavy into it, but there's no timeline at this point. I'm trying to implement some, and you would expect that coming from a manufacturer.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that it's going to happen overnight and that it's when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen.
In the works. Awesome.
Yeah, and Dave and I have started.
Question.
The reason we're together on this is that Dave and I have started cooperating. One of the products that we just introduced, which is in our custom series products, it's a in-room custom subwoofer, and we're using some of David's OEM. He's designed some OEM inserts that I put right in the bottom of the loudspeaker. It's not an add-on; it's part of the insert into the speaker. And that subwoofer is isolated, which is always a good thing. One thing I believe strongly in with Dave's approach is when you think about spikes, for example, that the idea is that it rigidly attaches itself to the boundary that it's sitting on. Let's say it's a wooden floor and you're sitting in your couch or your favorite chair. When an acoustic event occurs, the beginning of that acoustic event travels from the speaker in air to you, but it also travels through the speaker, through the spike, through the floor to you.
Yeah.
And did you know that sound travels faster in a solid than it travels in the air? Which means that if you spiked your loudspeakers and you're on a floor like that, you're going to hear pre-resonance. You're going to hear a sound or feel a sound before you actually hear it. So by isolating, I think the acoustic package or the acoustic event that you hear, the beginning of it, actually is more accurate because everything arrives to you at the same time. There's no pre-resonance caused by the sound traveling through a solid. So when I ask people about what their preference is, you can hear a difference between the two. I've just explained what the difference is.
And plus the bass tightens way up too.
Yeah.
Well, of course, because you don't have this extra lag in the bass where you have the initial and then something coming afterwards.
Like a delay.
Interesting. I saw these first. I saw some of your products, Dave, on Vanitu's website. I know those guys, Rick and Gary, and they're hardcore engineers, So I figured they wouldn't have these on here unless they actually did something. I'm trying to. Can you see my screen or no?
There we go.
So this is your.
Yeah. So that
you want to kind of go through some of this.
The image on the left is the anechoic chamber Paul was talking about.
That's the smaller chamber, and that's the one you saw the picture of me in black and white.
Gotcha.
This is a colored picture.
That's that M37 building that he was describing.
That's what's inside that building I showed you.
Yeah. So the graph on the right, the anechoic chamber, the output on the right there. Typically, when you test a speaker, you run it 3 times. You take 3 passes of it, and the variance from run to run is about 0.3 dB. And we take our isolators and we always test as a baseline against that, and we stay within that 3 dB. So we our goal is to ensure that we're not colorizing, that we're staying close, we're not changing what the manufacturer's done in any way, and we've got great accuracy and clarity all the way down to the bottom. We don't have that suck out at the bottom that that isolators are often notorious for. If you just want to scroll down further,
Sure.
Ron. Yeah, that's just showing the laser vibrometer will take an image, will take a movie image, an AVI file, and you can actually see what's going on. You can get the calculations with it. It's just showing the attenuation down through the frame of that stand.
Okay.
But if you continue down further, this is the laser vibrometer. So you see across the top, we've got that same frequency response. And by putting the same sweep frequency through the speaker, we can see the difference between the spikes and on our Gaias.
Gotcha.
So you see the purple line shows the spike,
Mhm.
and it's the delta between them that is related to the artifacts and so on that I was describing. Now you might think, I'm not really interested in what's causing all these anomalies in the speaker. I'm only interested in the boundary condition, the connection between the speaker and the floor. So we've created a test rig, and if you go down just a little bit further,
Yeah. Let's see here.
go down 2 slides, just beyond that, if you would. There you go. So that rig on the right-hand side has got the Gaias bolted to the bottom. It's got spikes on solenoids so that when we activate the solenoid, it just lifts it up off the Gaia. And again, we try to stay within 1/4 of an inch. And then if you look very carefully, you'll see that there's bungee cords. And we can suspend it on the bungee cords, and we can switch between those three alternatives. So trying to keep the height variance at 1/4 of an inch, we can see what's happening on spikes, on the Gaias, and on the bungee cord. And if you just scroll up a little bit, you'll see the chart that shows the 3 of them together.
Those speakers look like they're made in France.
Those are
Oh,
Go
focals.
up a little bit, Joe.
That
Up?
one is
Yeah,
right.
up.
Yeah,
up.
up.
There's,
Well, what's
Other
more
way?
what's
Other way
more
this way?
what's more important is
There.
I think I was the one who told Dave to try this experiment.
nice.
Yeah, that's correct. Paul said use a solenoid and stop goofing around just removing screws and stuff.
He's like,
So-
you're taking too much time, man. I got to go to lunch.
and it's also trying to keep it to that height differential.
That's cool.
So now you can see again the spikes in purple, the
Mhm.
Gaias, and then you can see the bungee cord underneath.
The blue.
Bungee cord is acting very similar to the Gaias, but the thing to note is when it's on the bungee cord, it really sounds like hell. I refer to it as sounding like foam, because you can hear all the information, but there's no edge to it. There's no definition. There's no attack to it. So it's obviously not far from ideal. But that's what we're dealing with. Is that is what's causing the smear, and that's what's causing the sound stage to collapse and become 2-dimensional.
Wow.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. I need to check these out. So if I have some stands, let's say, for example, would I be able to put your product between the speaker and the stand itself? Would that be okay?
Yeah, we would prefer, if you set a bookshelf speaker on a stand, we would prefer to be the resilient layer between
Bottom.
the speaker and the stand,
Gotcha. That makes sense.
as opposed to putting the Gaias at the very bottom, because we want to relate directly to the speaker itself, the live load itself. Now, if you bolted the speaker to the stand, it's now unity, and it doesn't matter. You could put the Gaias at the very bottom at that point.
Got it. Pretty cool. You guys have any questions? I've been kind of taking over the whole thing. I just had so many questions already. So I just noticed we're like an hour in.
Yeah, no.
yeah,
that's
Dave.
good.
Dave, I do have a question. What is the difference between isolation and something that would, if I'm using the word correctly, like dampen something? Is there a difference, and what is the difference?
Well, there's different approaches that people have and different materials that are being used. I don't think of these things as isolators. I think of them as devices that are tuned to work in a specific way.
Mm.
They do have an isomer in them. They do have a compliant material in them, but it's really the composition of the three parts that are making it work. And in fact, they're sensitive to being overloaded because once the two isolators touch each other, the performance falls off really fast.
Mm.
The bottom end is much more forgiving, but nonetheless, you still have to have enough weight on them to get them into the operating range. If you take our largest product, it takes a speaker up to 620 pounds. So if you put a speaker on that weighed 30 pounds, I mean, to the speaker, it looks like a solid mass.
Yeah.
So it has to, there is a range that it performs in.
Yeah, I think your question was centered around, is it isolating virtually or is it damping? I think what's Dave's unit is taking some of the energy that's generated by the loudspeaker, and it's damping it, and it's also turning some of the energy into heat.
Mhm.
Sure.
So that it's reducing the transfer of energy from the cabinet into the floor
the
it's standing
substrate.
on.
Yeah.
And when energy does go through it, it is damped. It doesn't ring or it doesn't resonate.
Right.
So it's a damped isolation. I would call it that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, even the curves, the suction cup effect, not only does it give that suction cup effect, but it gives a progressive rate of change against in weight. So by creating those shapes, we can actually extend the weight range and the response. And that's how we sculpt it to make them work.
Dave, is there a time and a place for spikes? Is there a time and a place where spikes are the appropriate tool for the job? I mean, my carpet in my listening room was stolen from 1970. It's really thick shag carpet. Would a device like yours still be the right tool for the job? Or in that example?
They also
Dave,
have the spikes too. I have them.
Dave has the platform that you put the unit on, right, Dave?
That's correct. So
There you go.
our units work very well on a tight carpet, on something that's got a very tight nap. But once they become too plush, they're not stable anymore. They become flimsy.
Mm.
So we have a spike disc that has 3 15-millimeter spikes.
I'll go grab it.
That goes down into the carpet, goes down into the binding of the carpet, and gives you that stability.
That grip. I see.
And now you're coupled to the floor and
Yeah.
isolated with the ISO.
From above. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Perfect.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's my only two questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Me too.
I mean,
Are you guys enjoying this? You guys
Yeah.
like this platform?
I
I'm
love
in
it.
heaven.
I love it. I could talk for hours.
I could listen for hours too.
Yeah.
Here it is.
There
right
you
here.
go.
Nice.
Spike.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Oh,
It's
that is
maybe
awesome.
different for Gaia too. That's stainless steel.
And then you
with-
put the guy on top of that, right?
Right.
That's correct.
Boom.
In fact, the Gaia will stick to it. It's like the suction cup effect.
Okay. Gotcha.
It'll actually
Wow.
connect right to it.
Wow. That
Just
is
li-
awesome.
All you have to do is lick it, and then you can stick it on.
No,
Shauna,
Demonstration,
did it
Shauna.
too.
Demonstration.
Shauna almost
give
did it.
give it a good squeeze and it'll stick.
That's funny. Hey,
Yeah.
Paul, I've got another question from a listener regarding kind of back.
There, I licked
to-
it.
There
you
you
go.
go.
Did it work?
I switched over to Ron
Oh, that's
while I did the
hilarious.
lick. Yeah, no, it works.
Well, you did the lick.
That's hilarious. Only Shauna. How did it taste though?
No comment.
All right, so and I won't say the last name because I'm sure I'll just butcher it. But Martin says, do dynamics get considered in the listening test, and if so, how? Like when we were doing the 3 people doing the listening test, the double blind test. Do you ask them about anything in regards to dynamics? I think is his question.
Did you have a timestamp for that, Mike?
I don't know, Chana.
Okay.
It was pretty early.
I wish I could show you a screenshot of the score sheet. But what I will do is I will forward the score sheet to Joe,
Oh yes.
and Joe can display it with some explanation, and that will answer.
Cool.
I'll also include the instruction to listeners
Okay.
that we give listeners, and a score sheet
Nice.
to show. I'll also maybe send. I have some other media that I can send around the listening test. So I'll send them to Joe.
Okay.
And maybe in the future you can maybe bring it up as a subject and
Oh, that's
awesome.
show
That's
people.
great. I might
Joe's a little excited. He's thinking, how can I use this now, right?
for the viewers. How many of you are interested in having me do a review based on that list? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, what-
we'll see. That might be something we can do.
Well, it could be what you use to keep your thoughts together when you're doing an evaluation,
Mhm.
because
I love it.
it's a nice. In fact, it was originally designed to be computer data acquisition,
Mhm.
and the sheet is designed with sliders on it.
Yeah.
So that the user was going to use sliders, but we never really got to that point.
I love it. I love that idea. You know, because when I do the reviews, I try to hit as many aspects as I can, and also, you know, I have my own personal biases,
Yeah.
and so I try to account for those and let people know, like, hey, I like my speakers kind of like this, and so you know. Anyway, I'm interested in that, and of course, I know my room well enough, so I know how stuff sounds in here,
Yeah,
good and bad.
I'll send you those documents that you can share with everyone.
Oh yes, yes, that's gonna be awesome. All right. Any other questions from the chat here? Anything else? We got some stuff going on. We got a lot of questions. We're just going and going today.
Decibel Destroyer is asking, does putting rubber feet under a subwoofer help if you are on wood floor over a crawl space but has carpet?
I mean, I use a big platform like that's. Dave,
Like
I'm
a
familiar
subdued
with
kind of
your products from my music studio here.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of decoupling devices. I use one for my Marshall 212-inch combo amplifier, but I do the same thing with subwoofers. Big platform. I got those dual rel 15-inch subs on them now. So I like the way it sounds. I notice there's less muddiness in the mid to low end, mid bass.
Well, you mentioned the Marshall there. We make a product now, the Stage 1. It's for guitar and bass amps. And the current version is for something that's Fender Twin and smaller, a combo. And shortly we'll have one that's large enough for 412 cabinets. But not only does it work well with guitar amps and that, but it's very popular for stage monitors. So musicians that are using a stage monitor that are hearing themselves back, you're not getting that smear, that muddiness and so on. You've got a very consistent sound from stage to stage. Each stage can be entirely different. And
Right.
so by having that consistency is very important. So we've launched that now, the Stage 1.
Very cool.
Dave, can you make something for the kid upstairs who's running, like for the bottom of his shoes or something like that? I can hear that guy. Edman, what is your last name? Are you answering questions about Dolby Atmos? I guess we can. I mean, we have time, a little bit more time. We're getting close to the end, though.
From the crowd, do we have any other questions for these gentlemen while we have them? Anybody out there that wants to ask questions to either Paul or Dave while we have these gentlemen on the show?
Yeah, pick their brain while they're here.
Yeah,
not every day.
This is a pleasure.
All right,
On that topic, the customer asking about Atmos, we PSB has worked with Dolby for many years. In fact, Dolby, their first show they ever showed their technology, because before that time, their technology was recognized through third parties like Pioneer and Yamaha and all the other companies. And the last year they had the CES show in Chicago, Dolby showed their technology directly to the consumer, which was, the beginnings of, or in the middle of all the surround sound home theater boom that happened back then. And they actually used PSB to demonstrate all of the multi-channel sounds. They built this huge display with all our Stratus, they used Synchrony at the time, Synchrony loudspeakers. And since then, I've worked on products that we've adapted for the Dolby Atmos, and in particular, the elevation speaker, the Dolby enhanced elevation speaker. And I worked closely with Dolby and their engineers in not only implementing it, but I created a lot of data criteria that I did at the National Research Council in Ottawa, and I shared that with Dolby. So, I'm proud to say I've had the opportunity to work with them on developing some of the Atmos criteria.
Wow.
And continue to do so, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
In fact, Dolby, I'm proud to say, used quite a few PSBs in their San Francisco office or their San Francisco facility.
We have a question here. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
From Kanga Empire. It looks like that grill looks familiar. Where is that grill from? Looks
It's
like
a paradigm.
One of the
paradigm
paradigms, I
grill,
think,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So yes, from a manufacturing and design perspective, what is one detail or myth of products that you'd like to bust? Ooh, that's for you. That's for you guys.
Well, I guess you could. I could disband a lot of myths by explaining what the conclusions that were determined after all of this listening test work was done. There are three basic conclusions. Number one is that most of the people, most of the time, agree on the relative qualities of a group of loudspeakers, which means there's no personal taste when asked, does that sound natural? The second thing we've learned is that musical experience and musical taste are absolutely no prerequisites for being a good judge of sound.
Wow.
We as human beings all kind of have the same capability. And the biggest, believe it or not, capability does not lie just with our ears. It lies within our brain. And we all have that built in. And we have no way of not using it.
Wow.
The third thing that we've learned is that a properly interpreted set of objective measurements, the measurements we do in the anechoic chamber, correlate directly with listener preferences.
Wow.
So that I can actually measure a loudspeaker and I can predict what score that will make in a listening test. Not just that will give it a high score. I can tell you what number in a normalized number that speaker will score based on its measurements. So that's taking, subjective evaluations and turning that process into a science where it's actually a tool. There are people that we tested that you could put in the listening room and you could have 4 loudspeakers in there. They would judge all of those loudspeakers and give it a score. You could take one of those loudspeakers and keep it in the test. You could change the 3 other loudspeakers that are completely different sounding. The listener would go in there and he'll give that same speaker he gave a 7.5 to, he'll give that same speaker a 7.5.
Wow.
That's how accurate these people can be.
Wow.
That's
Man,
awesome.
I'm loving all this. I'm telling you right now. Like for me, I'm just nerding out right here.
Yeah.
So this is great.
Well, one other thing, that you might find kind of interesting, maybe not coming from a speaker designer, but if you want to share my screen.
There you go.
Okay, you'll see a picture of a man and a boy. Well, the man is my father, and the boy is me, and I'm standing in front of the workbench that my father used to build that violin for me.
Wow.
Wow.
And if you'll notice, up to the left of me, up in the right-hand corner of the picture, you'll see the frame that the violin was built around.
Oh, yeah.
The violin is actually built around a mold and then removed from the mold and the top put on it once it's finished. So what I wanted to bring this up for was that everything that PSB has done has all been based on the love and experience of music. This is not an engineering exercise as much for me as it is a musical appreciation exercise. And I've spent my whole life I was 11 years old in this picture. And I studied violin from a very early age until I started PSB. Actually, I studied violin, and I made a conscious decision when I was about 17 years old to, instead of going into music production, which is performing, I decided to go into music reproduction, which is building loudspeakers. So that just gives you a bit of background on how all of this got started. And of course, with my father's interest in woodworking, the first thing that he and I did when we were in pursuit of hi-fi, and we bought our first hi-fi system that I would truly call hi-fi. It was a Rotel receiver back in, a few years after that. That was in 63. I would imagine in 1965 was when I got into 2-channel hi-fi.
I was about to say a smart ass thing. How you said, well, musical background doesn't matter, but maybe the woodworking helped out a little bit.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, the woodworking helped, and it allowed me a place to actually build my first loudspeakers in our garage. And I worked in a hi-fi store at the time, which was near the University of Waterloo, an engineering university in Ontario, Canada, in my hometown, Kitchener-Waterloo. And in fact, that's the university I went to eventually. But when I was in high school, I worked in a hi-fi store, which was really close to the university. And the owner allowed me to build panels that had all the holes drilled in it, baffles that had the woofer holes cut out, the mid-range, crossovers that I built in my garage. I cut up all the wood. I drilled all the holes for the screws. I included the screws, and I sold them to university students with as a kit that
Nice.
they could build in their dorm rooms back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah. We have a question. So thank you to, let's see, Hi-Fi Vega. Thank you for the super chat there.
Thank you,
and he
bud.
had a question earlier, fun little question. He wants to know, he does a lot of car audio stuff. So in the car audio
yeah.
world, he's the man. And he wants to know if you two are using if you have a stock system in your vehicles.
There's the question.
Me? Yeah, I have a stock Bose system in my car.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah.
The 4-letter word.
In my car, I
No cussing on here.
I prefer to just listen to news. I'm
A lot of
I'm
talk
not-
radio.
Yeah, I'm not a music listener, so to speak.
I hear Bose are pretty good for news.
Yeah, they're excellent for news.
Sorry.
How about you, Dave?
I actually, my system isn't that bad. Where I find Bose really has their weakness is they don't pay as much attention above 2 kilohertz that I would focus on. And the environment is rather hostile and quite reflective. So any car audio is a challenge for that matter. But I find that the balance is a little bit airs on the side of being a little spiky at the high end. But other than that, it's fairly neutral sounding.
Yeah. Dave, what do you got?
No, it's interesting. I've been thinking about upgrading the system in the car, but no, still original.
Still got the same.
Which one is it?
Pardon?
What kind of system you got in there? What kind of system do they have in the Ferrari or whatever?
It's not a Ferrari.
Ah.
I think it's hard.
Harman
Kardon?
Harman Kardon.
Yeah. Make some
Beamers.
good stuff.
Beamer?
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, how would you answer that question earlier about if there's any, myths or things that you would want to bust about your products or products out there? Was there anything that came to mind when that question popped up for you?
Well, the biggest thing is I think the world seems to be stuck on 2 things right now. And that's kind of spikes and mass. and every manufacturer ships with spikes.
Sure. Right.
And people think when there's some kind of anomaly, the spikes aren't seated, and that seems to be the baseline. And I mean, anytime we go to a show, any opportunity we have, we do A/B demos back and forth, and the difference is just stunning. You'll hear it straight away. And so gradually people are changing it. As Paul described, Paul's working on new projects now that include our stuff. We're talking to many manufacturers actually that are starting to bring it on. The old question might have been, if this is so good, why aren't manufacturers using it? Well, this is 2020, and guess what?
We are starting to. Sorry, I haven't done it sooner, Dave.
Yeah, I would love to see.
That's a delta change.
I would love to see some stuff that maybe some of your products are maybe not aimed towards. So some of these speakers that I have in here are like $99 a pair. Like it wouldn't make sense really for somebody like that to apply those products instead of just getting a better speaker.
Yeah.
Right. So the P5s here are what, $399 a pair. So I would love to see something like maybe more affordable with some sacrifices that go along with it. I don't know. I'm not trying to tell you how to do things. I would just love to see it. Right.
These guys aren't cheap. For sure.
Well, we make the mini pucks that go in, that would fit underneath that speaker, and they're $99 for the set of 8.
Okay.
Oh wow, there you go.
Okay.
I didn't know about that.
There's your answer, Joe.
I didn't know about that.
I also want to jump in here and just say something. When there was a show that I once went to with my brother, and they were doing a demonstration of, and I forget the name of the actual platform that you guys offer in different sizes that has the pucks. I can't remember the name of it, but either way, it doesn't matter. What was interesting about what's that?
The wooden platform, the butcher block?
No, it's I think it's one of the products that got you on the map. I think it was. It looks.
You're talking about the ISO series, the original stand.
Thank you. Yes.
On the pro side. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Here, I got that pulled up right now.
And I think it's important that we bring this up, and I tell the story because in that room they were using the cheapest, flimsiest, lamest stands that you could ever imagine. They were using those originals. Yep, those guys right there. They were using those, and they were using very affordable, cheap speakers, and they had the exact same thing on the exact same type of rig, but just with those being used, and they were doing an A/B comparison. And my brother and I were blown away by how much better those inexpensive, cheap speakers sounded on those than just on the cheap stands. So I think we got to get past this mindset of, if I have cheap speakers, then it might not make a big difference. That was not my experience. It made a huge difference. So I just want to mention that.
Can you bring up the ones that you're talking about that were, are these the ones that we're talking about, the ones that are inexpensive?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the ones that Dave was talking about.
Who has it on the screen? Who's controlling that there?
The $99 ones are the mini pucks in the top right there.
Right there. Oh, is it on that same thing? Top right.
Go back one.
No.
Go back one. Whoever was controlling that.
That's, I think, Chana.
Go back.
It was back to the previous screen that you were just at.
Go back
The
to
previous page that you were just at.
I'm lost.
Go back to the page you were just at.
This one?
I don't know. Whatever you clicked on.
I clicked on this thing here.
Okay, well, click on one of them.
Okay.
And then it was showing like all of them.
Techno Dad, what's going on?
I don't know.
Techno's having.
I think you need some IT support.
IsoAcoustics. What was it called? Mini puck?
Oh, yeah.
There we go. That'll work.
We're here to help Techno Dad.
Yes, exactly.
Second one. Next one.
Second one. Okay.
Right there.
Okay, so let's see.
There you go.
Oh, $99.
Oh, for a set of 8.
And that's for 8 of them.
Mm-hmm. And they're for small applications.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Like smaller bookies and things like that. I would.
So
imagine.
I could use those on some bookshelf speakers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not kidding, Joey. You should do it because that demo, it freaked me out and it freaked out my brother. It was not a subtle difference. It was a night and day difference. This isn't one of those things where, oh, you got to stand on one foot and lean your head to the side. And no. It was
holding
very
antenna to the right.
Yeah. So anyhow, off my soapbox.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
no,
pretty amazing. I want to try them out.
Yeah, it's a phenomena that I don't entirely understand, but it has to do with, I mean, the interaural timing of the human brain. In other words, the difference that the left ear can hear between the left and the right ear in time is about 9 microseconds, which equates to a bandwidth of around 45 kilohertz. So an acoustical event that arrives in one ear different by another as short in time as one cycle at 40 kilohertz is the kind of resolution our brain is capable of. So it's very difficult to quantify what David's product is doing, but because we can hear in such a small time domain, that we hear those differences because of the interaural accuracy between both ears. I mean, that's how we localize things.
Yeah. Maybe let me tell a quick story that I think will put that in perspective for you. We were invited to the Boston Symphony by John Stork. John Stork is a co-founder of WSDG. Are you familiar with them? He did the original Electric Lady with Jimi Hendrix back in the 60s, and they've got offices in New York and around the world. They renovated the control room at the Boston Symphony, and they asked us to come to put the Gaias under the B&W speakers in the control room. So we listened to a vocal, James Taylor, and we listened to a symphony piece. And then we put the Gaias underneath. And as soon as we stood the speakers up and started listening, didn't matter where you were standing in the room, everybody was startled at how everything had opened up. And the reason why it was so interesting for them is that they have over 40 microphones in decatries hanging from the ceiling over the orchestra. And they're very cognizant of the shape of the orchestra. And as one engineer described it, they didn't realize how collapsed their soundstage had been. One engineer described it as the phantom image was being projected against a pane of glass. And now we've opened the window and it's got 3 dimensions. So think about those microphones. Any one position on that stage is picking up is being picked up by numerous microphones. And they're actually hearing the timing differences in this 3-dimensional envelope. And that's all the timing. That's the timing that Paul was just describing.
Wow.
So it's not just a question of the accuracy, the clarity. It's the dimensional, it's the 3-dimensional natural presentation of that sound.
And David, what you need to do, David, is create a metric that can measure that and quantify it. That's the hard part, because we're dealing with a very, I mean, once you get into a realm where things are pretty good, and gilding the lily is really takes the edge off and does all of these wonderful things if you isolate the loudspeaker the way Dave does. And it's something that Dave has done, measurements on how it affects the actual frequency response. But these are not just frequency response related, they're also time domain related. And those are things that are very difficult to quantify in respect to how we perceive them and in what ranking or how much it influences what we hear.
Am I right in saying it this way? Even though our ears can't go, let's say, past 20 kilohertz when we're a baby or something like that, but you're saying our brain can resolve the difference at 40 kilohertz between what's happening in one ear versus the other. Is that, am I kind of getting that right or not?
What I'm saying is that the interaural capability of detecting a sound that arrives in one ear compared with the time it takes for the sound to arrive in the other ear, we can resolve the time domain down to 9 microseconds. Meaning, it doesn't mean that our frequency response is that wide. It just means that the arrival, if there's a stimulus at 1,000 hertz in the left ear, and then a stimulus 9 microseconds later of 1 kilohertz in the left ear, we can tell the difference between those two.
Wow. It's just amazing. I've never even considered that. That's why. Look at Ron.
Yeah. If I
What's
had a
going on
microphone
over
to
there?
drop for Paul, I would drop it right now, and we just end the show.
Game over. Well, we're in an hour and a half. That was awesome. We need to do this again. I don't know if you guys enjoyed this or not. I did.
Yeah,
What-
that was
what-
That was good.
What I'd like to do is maybe do some things that are very more focused on specific aspects of maybe speaker design,
Yeah.
listening, maybe what we listen for,
Yeah.
what music is good to listen to, and what to expect to hear when you're hearing differences with this music.
Yeah,
And,
let's do
and
that.
I think listeners really would appreciate. And for me, what all of this is all about is not listening to loudspeakers. It's music appreciation.
Mhm.
And in all genres. My background, of course, is very classical, but I enjoy all kinds of music and listen to all kinds of music. And I performed I even played in a band for 9 years part time. So
Yeah.
I've played everything from Led Zeppelin to Glenn Miller.
awesome.
Well, let's
Awesome.
definitely do that. I mean, this is a great overview and an introduction to the folks who don't know you.
Yeah.
And so let's continue on this. Let's go into more detail in future podcasts. I would love to do it.
Be great.
Offline, Joe, we can talk about some of the topics, and then you can maybe even solicit your readers to come up with
Questions.
topics
Yeah.
well, not just questions, but maybe a topic, like something that they're interested in understanding better.
Hearing about, sure.
Sure.
You know what this feels like to me? It feels like the first day of a college class, and you go in and you hear what it's going to be about, and you're like, this class is going to be awesome.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
how it
yeah.
feels. I feel like this is an
Yeah.
introduction, and I'm just very excited for the next class.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so let's do it again. We'll stay in touch. I know you're gonna send me some stuff, so I'm excited to get that. And of course, most of us are here at home, and so this is something that we can do for
Very easily,
you
yeah.
guys out there. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this as much as I did, and I can tell Ron was really enjoying it. And
Yeah.
so, you guys know I did the announcement that I'm gonna have to do a quick plug that I'm doing an online trade show, something very different. But I think if you look at what we just did now, you kind of get a taste for what is possible. So
Yeah.
we're all, I'm here by myself. You guys are sitting by yourselves, but we were able to exchange information. I learned so much
Connect.
in this past hour and a half. It's unbelievable. So I think we can do that and some. And yeah, hope to see all you guys there.
Yeah,
I
guys,
re-
and we'll be leaving all the links to these guys' sites and information down below. So make sure you check that out. Before you leave. So bookmark them. Check out IsoAcoustics, PSB speakers as well for sure.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
Thank
Dave
you.
and Paul.
Enjoyed that.
Okay.
No FOMO.
See you
Yes.
soon.
Hey, take care, guys. Let me do a quick outro here. Go ahead, Shauna. You're the best.
Where's the
Second
music?
best, but he can do it this time. That's fine.
There it is.
Oh, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Hi-Fi podcast with special guests Paul Barton and Dave Morrison from PSB Speakers and IsoAcoustics. My name is Chana D. I am the Techno Dad on behalf of Michael, Joe, and Ron and the Daily Hi-Fi crew. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Peace.
Thank you. Bye bye. Roll the credits.